Today what we're going to talk about are how to use lists and files. So the nice thing is that when Python came to write the list methods, they wrote special methods that will work with files. Now sometimes you will find that those methods are easier to use, and sometimes you'll not really want to use them. And we'll see both today. So the first thing is, let's review how to open files. So remember, if I want to write out to a file, I'll create like a file handle, and I will use the open function. I will put the name of my function, the name of my file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my file on the desktop. So I'm going to say C users desktop, my username, desktop, and then I'll say, let's say Python test.txt. So this is my file, and I'm going to open it for writing. So I want to start by writing some content to a file. And we always said when you open a file, immediately close it so you don't forget. Okay, so this was how we started writing to a file. Now, if I have a list, so let's say here I have a list of some student names or pet names. So let's create a list called pets. It has dog and cat and rabbit. Okay, and I want to write these names, these animals, these pets to the file. So one way we can do it is we can have a for loop and say for every pet, for example, in pets, go to file, H, and write that pet to the file. Now, do you remember what this is going to do? Let's run this code and see what's going to happen. So let's go to the desktop. So let me minimize everything. And let's find my Python test. There it is. And my pets are there, but there are no spaces. And we ran into this problem before where we said every time you're writing to a file, you need to make sure you append the /n at the end. So let's do it one more time. Now let's go find the file again. And now the pets are there, each one on a separate line. So what Python did, instead of us writing this method ourselves, this for loop ourselves, what we can do is say write lines and give it a list, and it will write those lines to the list. Let's test it out and see if it does the job. So this is using for loop to write the list contents. So we don't want to use this. We want to use the built-in write lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say file h.write lines, and I'm going to give it pets. And let's see if this does the job nicely. And I find that it wrote the content to the list, to the file, except what is it doing? It's not putting the /n inside. So write lines is nice because, you know, it's one call. However, it has this issue where the space, the new line is not there. So if you have content and you just want to write it all in one line, that'll work. But otherwise, you'll have to use a for loop like we did. So when would be a good time to use this? If this already had like the /n. So if the content already had the /n where it needed it, or for example, it had spaces, this will work. So if I have the /n in here, and I go back and I look at my file, then write lines is going to work good. Otherwise, we have to use the for loop. So again, it's not perfect, but it's there in case, you know, it depends on the list that you have. Now, what if I want to read in from a file? Just like we have write lines, we also have read lines. What read lines does is give you back the content of the list in, the content of the file in a list format. So what does that mean? Let's go to our file and let's look at the file that we have. So we have a file that has everything, every animal on a separate line. And now I want to read it. So here, I want to read the file. So let's open up the file for reading. I'm just going to say file R, open, and I'm going to open the same file again for reading. I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to use the R flag. And we always need to remember to close the file. Now, let's read it in. So I'm going to say content equal to file r.read lines. Let's see what content looks like. Let's print content, what it looks like. And it's printing me the contents of the file, each line as a list element. So dog was on a line, so it read it in for me. So here, read lines and write lines work together in giving you back the content exactly as it was. Now, if I put it back here without the /n, things are not going to really work. So here, because I don't have the /n, all this got written as one line, and then when I read it in, it got read in as one line. So now I have a list that only has one element. So for read lines and write lines to really work, you may need to make sure the /n is in there. Okay, or you need to just forget about read lines and write lines and use a for loop. But I just wanted you to know that they are there and they exist. Let's look at this example here. We have a file that contains numbers and we want to read it in. Now this assumes that every number is on a separate line. So when I say read lines, it's going to give me a list. This is a list of what? It's a list of strings. Because it's a list of strings, what do I need to do? I need to convert these numbers, these strings, to numbers. So this while loop, the purpose of this while loop, it's going through every index from 0 up to the length of the list, numbers, and it's going to every numbers index, every item in numbers, and changing it to be the int value of whatever was there. So it's taking the string, converting it to an int, and then storing it back into numbers, and then just going through. Let's write some code like this. So let me come here and let's create a file. So here we have test.txt, and I'm going to just put numbers in it. Okay. Save it. So it's called test.txt. And what I want to do is I want to open, let's call it numbers file equal to open. And it's called test.txt, and let's remove the extra quote. And I want to read it in. Okay. Let's remember that we need to close the file. So here, if I just try saying content equal numbers file dot read lines, if I just use read lines and I print content, you will see that the content is a bunch of strings. So here I have a bunch of strings. Now that's not going to work. So what I want to do is I want to go to this content and change it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to write a for loop that goes through every number in content. Sorry, I can't do that. No, I have to go by index because I'm going to be changing the content. This we said doesn't work for changing, it only works for accessing. So let's say for every index in the length of content, so I want to go up to the length of content, that range. To get all the numbers up to the length of the content list. What I want to do is I want to change what's in the list. So I want to go to content of I, of index. I want to go to location 0 and change it. What do I want to change it to? Well, I want to see what it was before. So I'm going to say content of index. That gives me 10 with the /n. What do I want to do to that? Well, the first thing is I want to strip. You really don't need to do the strip, but I'm just going to show you with it. I want to strip the /n from it. Okay. Now, after I remove the /n, it becomes the string n. What do I want to do to that? I want to convert it to an int. And so what this does, it takes the string that was in the list, converts it to a number, and then stores it back in the list. After this is done, if I say print me the content, I'm going to see that now it's a list of numbers. Oops, and I don't know how to spell. Let's see, where's my extra n? There we go. And now that list that was strings has become numbers. So when you're working with files and lists, the only tricky part really is that /n that, you have to keep putting with the right. The other thing is you have to keep keep in mind that the right takes only strings. So if you have numbers, you're going to have to convert them to strings when you're writing. When you're reading things as strings, so you have to convert them back to numbers. So you have to do the opposite. So if I wanted to take these and write them back to a file, let's try that. Let's say here I have nums equal to 10, 45, 89, and I wanted to write these to a file. So let's say nums file equal to open, and I want to write, okay, and let's say nums file dot close here. So if I want to write these numbers, I can't just say nums file dot write lines nums. This is not going to work. It's going to crash. Why? Because I spelled wrong. Let's try one more time. Here it says argument must be a string, not an int. So it's complaining at line 22 that I'm trying to write numbers and it's expecting it to be a string. So what I need to do is first convert these to strings. So I would have to write some kind of for loop, or what I can do instead of, I have two options. Number one, I can convert the nums list to strings. So I can say for index in the range, the length of nums. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to nums of index and say, I want you to be the string value of nums of index. So whatever you are, I'm going to change you to the string value. And to get ready for nums list, to the right lines, I'm going to even add the /n now. So here, this is one way I could do it, is convert my list to strings and append the /n. And so now it'll work. It'll work. It'll let me write them. So if I go back and look at this test.txt, it contains the numbers. Was it test.txt that we were doing? Let me go back. Sorry, it's Python test. So let's go back to Python test. It has the numbers written because what I did was I converted them to strings. So here, what we did was we converted the list to be a list of strings so we can write nums, write lines. Okay, so here we're using a for loop and write lines. So this is one way I could have done it. What's another way that I could have done it? Well, I could forget about write lines and just use one for loop. So I can say for every num in nums, just going to go to my nums file, and I'm going to say write me this number as a string. So I'm going to say the string value of number plus /n. So here, I'm not changing the contents of the list. Here I was changing the contents of the list so I can write it to the file. Here I'm not changing the contents of the list, but what I'm doing is I'm going to the file and saying take each number in the list and take the string equivalent of it, add /n, and write that to the file. So this will write the same thing to the file. Both will write the same thing. So really, when you're using these methods that are provided, read lines and write lines, they seem to be convenient, but in reality, they don't solve the problem because you still have to manually make sure that you put the /n when you're writing to the file. You need to make sure that you do the conversion from number to string when you write, and from string back to number when you're reading. So for today's classwork, what you're going to do is you're going to modify 8.1 so that you, instead of reading the numbers from the user, you're going to ask the user for the name of a file, and you're going to read in that file. And the file is the one that's going to have the numbers in it. Now, you're going to read the numbers in the file into a list. You're going to sort the list, find the min and max like you did before, the average. And then what I want you to do is I want you to open that same file that the user told you the numbers were in, and I want you to append to its end. You're going to append to the end a couple things. You're going to append the sorted numbers, the min, the max, and the average. After you do that, you're going to open the file again for reading and print the contents of the file using read lines to read all the content as into one string. Okay. When you're testing it, test it with a file that contains 8, 6, 1, and 2, and submit your Python file and a screenshot of running your code. Now, one thing is that when your file starts up, it's going to contain 8, 6, 1, 2. After the code is done with the file is going to have more. It's going to have all the sorted numbers and min and max and average in it, because I'm asking you to append to this input file. So just note that when you test it, every time before you test it, you have to go back to the file and change the content. Otherwise, the program will not run because you're going to have some text in there that's not going to be numbers. Okay, so that is something that you'll have to keep in mind when you're doing this classwork assignment.